In this video, we're going to take a look at Pekinese stitch, and that sounds very fancy, but it's actually just a very simple laced stitch. However, it is named, and you may run across many other stitches like this that will just be a combination of the stitches you've previously learned or a couple simple techniques, and they have a name all their own. So Pekinese stitch is a line of backstitch, which I have here in blue, with a second thread laced back through it in a looping fashion. Here I've centered the loops pretty evenly on either side of that backstitch, and you can tell they look just a little different on each side. In the center here, as I worked around the circle, I left the larger loops that this forms on the outside of the circle, giving it this little scalloped edge, and the inside of it is pulled tight against the backstitch so that you hardly even see it as anything other than a second line. So let's take a look at how you form this stitch. To start, I've done a line of backstitch in a pearl cotton, and now I've loaded a needle with full 6 strands of DMC floss, and I've come up just slightly below the line that I stitched. I'm going to skip the first stitch and come up from the bottom of the second stitch, leading with the eye of my needle so that I'm not poking anything. And then I'm going to come back down in that first stitch, making a little loop. All right, so we're just sliding the thread underneath the stitches we've already made. So there's our first loop. I'm going to skip the second stitch and come up underneath the third. And then I'm going to go back down in the second stitch, the stitch right before it. Okay, and there's another little loop. So again, I came up here, I'm going to skip a stitch and come up in the next stitch. And then I'm going to go down in the stitch just before it. So I'm creating a line of loops around my line of stitches, and you can see that here I'm pulling them pretty much all the way through, but not quite. The bulkiness of this thread fills the space very nicely compared to the size of my stitches. Certainly if you had longer stitches or smaller stitches, if you used thinner thread, it would all look different, so you can play with that just a little bit. But this is the Pekinese stitch. It's just these little loops of laced stitches underneath a line of backstitch.